Welcome, 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 everybody, to another Sunday of When Black Women Gather. My name is Helen Higginbotham. I'm the founder of this organization where we bring mostly Black women, but lately there's so much happening in our community that I've just been inviting everybody to these very necessary conversations about things that are relevant to us and that are impacting us. Today, as you know, our subject is HBCUs. HBCUs are in the news lately for all kinds of things, from Howard over enrolling to students at Tuskegee being told to wear bonnets. I'm sorry, being told they can't wear bonnets. No
Mhm.
bonnets, no pajamas. Come to class in clothes. And on a good note, we've got Coppin State who's saying, hey, if you want to go to an HBCU and there's not an HBCU in your state, come to us. We'll give you in-state tuition. And not to mention that things are looking good in a lot of respects because enrollment is up at the universities, and with that brings challenges. So today we have the pleasure of, let me bring Donald on screen. Today we have the pleasure of spending time with Donald Temple. I think some of you later. I got so many emails, Donald. Is this the guy that's on the radio? I'm like, yeah, this is the guy that's on the radio. So welcome, Donald. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. I'm going to do a brief intro, but I just had to throw that radio plug in there, which I'm sure you'll tell us more about later on. But anyway, thank you so much for coming, Donald.
Thank you.
So very quickly, let me just give you a quick rundown of his bio. He will expand upon it. I have to tell you that he is too involved for me, and involved in too many things for me to cover everything. I'm just going to give you a brief synopsis of the things that Donald does. So Donald Temple, affectionately known as DT, graduated from Howard University in the class of 1975 and University of Santa Clara School of Law in 1978, and he earned an LLM at Georgetown Law Center in 1981, respectively. His love and commitment for his beloved alma mater, Howard University, is unmatched. I'm going to say that that's his favorite alma mater, right, Donald?
It is.
Okay, I said it for him. I have three. Howard is my favorite too. So I'll say it. Okay, his impressive law career, which includes pro bono representation of student activists at Howard University, spans nearly 5 decades and has involved high profile civil and commercial litigation representing workers, consumers, students, civic organizations, public employees. He has served as counsel to Local 2401, the union representing DC government employees. He is also well known for taking on and winning a case against Eddie Bauer for racial discrimination against Black consumers, where he introduced the term consumer racism. Presently, Donald is representing Howard alumni in a lawsuit regarding governance and its removal of stakeholder elected alumni on its board of trustees, which I am sure he will talk to us a little bit about today. But long before protest movements became headline news, Donald Temple, a former student government leader himself, was defending the constitutional rights of students and activists from the Howard University campus demonstrations of the 1989 to the protest movements of 2018 and 2021. He repeatedly entered disputes where institutional authority confronted the right to dissent. His work has consistently reflected the belief that constitutional protections are most important when exercising them becomes inconvenient to those in power. In addition to his practice, Donald has founded the 47-year-old Charles Hamilton Houston Summer Law School Prep Institute, where he has, oops, oops, sorry, guys. Okay. Where he has helped more than 600 students, primarily African American students, prepare for law school and the legal profession. His awards, to name a few, include the National Bar Association's Gertrude Rush Award, the Washington Bar Association's Charlotte E. Ray and Charles Hamilton Houston Awards, the Metropolitan Washington Employment Lawyers Association Attorney of the Year Award, the National Conference of Black Lawyers Lawyer of the Year Award, and Georgetown University Law Center's Father Robert Drinan Award. In his spare time, he has some, I think, he hosts Lovethology, which is a weekly jazz program that I'm often sending you ladies emails out to invite you to attend. It's a weekly jazz show on WPFW, which you can get nationally. So if you're not in the DC area, you can listen online. And where he uses music to explore relationships between collective self-love, African American history, culture, and social transformation. Never has Donald shied away from the struggle for his people. He is passionate in his commitment to the legacy and mission of HBCUs and why our schools matter. Please join me in welcoming Donald Temple to our gathering. So now is where you hear applause in the background. You hear it, Donald?
Yeah, I hear it.
Yeah, okay. So,
Hey,
yes, darling.
first of all, thank you for inviting me. I've always told you that I think it's important that in our dialogues that we are totally inclusive of men and women about what's going on in our community. And to those who took some time on this Sunday to at least have a conversation, I think what will be a little bit more than a conversation about HBCUs that do not exist in isolation, particularly as we approach the next 90 days or so and what's going on in the nation in terms of turning back the progress, the substantial progress that we have made throughout the last 200 years. So certainly, I mean, FAMU is in the news, Howard's in the news, Tuskegee is in the news, but I think those are very superficial questions to some extent. They're meaningful, but they don't really get to the root of the question that you pose: is do HBCUs matters? And certainly, given the political climate, economic situation, what's happening with artificial intelligence and the acceleration of technology, and the cultural shifts and challenges that we face as a community, HBCUs by definition matter. By definition matter. But it's a bigger question than that. And for the next few minutes or so, I like to kind of take a deeper dive into that. On one hand, we're in a climate where it's a very uncertain climate. And what we do know is historically, why we even have HBCUs, and so we can't even talk about that without, and I'll get further into the definition of HBCUs, but I also want to thank people, and I want to thank, some people on this line that have a lot more knowledge. I'm not an expert by any means in HBCUs, but I am and have been close to the students and to the alumni in different respects. And when you talk about the 89 protest was an interesting protest because it involved Lee Harvey Atwater being on the board at Howard. And the students were extremely well organized. But that wasn't the first time, at Howard that happened. It happened in 1968. Few people know that in 1924, Howard University students were asking for elected seats on the board of trustees and for a Black president of the university. The 1989 protest resulted in the ouster of a Black president as a result of the Lee Harvey Atwater issue. The 2018 and 2021 protests, we were involved in the 1990 protests at UDC. And these protests have been instructive, and I'll talk about them because I think that what I learned as a lawyer over those 30 years of protests is that we undervalue students. We underestimate students. And it's part of what I'll speak about today because I think that students, when I was at Howard as a young sophomore, we had a book titled we were required to read a book called Students as Niggers. And it was the notion that people minimize students and how they think. And now, recently, as a lawyer in a lawsuit against my beloved university, Howard University, that I love immensely, my brother and sister went to Howard, my daughter went to Howard, my other daughter went to FAMU. I'm connected to this notion, the value of these institutions, and to be in a battle against our university for 5 years with a law firm with an endless pocket on behalf of alumni that were disenfranchised from the board, it speaks volumes. But those are the backdrops that we'll just briefly cover, and I apologize. As I mentioned, I'm not an expert. I do have some views. They're based on my life experiences as a lawyer and as an alum. But the
As a
history,
committed and as a committed alum. Let me just say I'm going to go off screen and leave it just for you. Those of you who have questions, please drop them in the chats, and we'll be sure to circle back and get them when we get to the end. Donald, I have one request is saying that can you turn up your volume a little bit? I don't know. I just one, so I don't know if it's just one person or if
actually
I hear you
it's at its highest level. I'll try to speak a little bit
fine.
louder.
Okay. All right. So I'll be here in the background. Just
Yes,
I'm here
stop me if
with
you
you.
need to. But in my law school program, which is the Charles Hamilton Houston Law School Preparation Institute, it's a 7-week program that we do for entering law students. The first case that our students get is the reported Dred Scott case. And that case is instructive because one of the undercurrents of this whole educational struggle is the notion that historically and constitutionally and judicially, in fact, is that the Africans who were enslaved were considered to be inferior. So between 1619, literally, through the Civil War, we were viewed as inferior beings, and that certainly was articulated substantially in the 1857 Dred and Harriet Scott Supreme Court case. But for us to keep in mind as a backdrop that you have a Supreme Court decision there where the writing is that Black people were inherently inferior. Africans and the descendants of these African slaves, they were inherently inferior, and that for ad infinitum, even through now and through whatever future that we would have as a nation, that they were enslaved and inferior, but enslaved for their own benefit. So there's this notion, this undercurrent that we see that says, hey, Black people can't learn. They're not competitive. Fortunately, we moved through time, and in 1868, we gained some legal and constitutional identity. We're no longer disconnected being specimens, no citizenship. We became Americans. And with that, between that 1830, 1857, 1868, we saw the development, even before Dred Scott, the development of independent institutions that realized against the backdrop of enslavement, against the backdrop of compulsory ignorance laws. Can you imagine laws that were on the books that said that Black people, it would be against the law to educate a Black person, to teach them to read or write, subjects of final imprisonment in many of these southern states. But we resisted that. We developed the educational institutions, Cheney, Wilberforce, Howard in 1867 Howard by congressional law. And so that's part of that backdrop. And so in the 1800s, we wanted education. We longed for education. We cherished education. And moving into the 1900s, you had Charles Hamilton Houston, almost single-handedly, and then subsequently with Thurgood Marshall and a cadre of other lawyers, Constance Baker Motley, saying, listen, we have to integrate these schools because we need to have Black people need to be educated. And at the same time, the development of these historically Black institutions that we call, that have the history, but they're not necessarily Black, in the Black institutions that are only attended by Black students. But those institutions had to be developed. And then we moved into Brown v. Board of Education, of course, in 1954, and this notion of all deliberate speed, but things really didn't materialize until the 60s, and the civil rights laws that were passed in 64, 65, 68, and that struggle, in particular in the 1960s, and it transcended what was happening with Adam Clayton Powell, but it was the Panthers, it was the Nation, it was Dr. King, Malcolm X, and the pressures were created and the doors opened and these institutions opened to a certain extent. And so we know that we need these institutions. And as they were created, one thing that remained consistent, they were undercapitalized, underfinanced, and underdeveloped, but not necessarily underintellectualized. So that struggle continued, and we built those institutions, and we made a mark. And this is important. As we began to progress, we began to see a white backlash. That white backlash became more evident in the 1977 and 1978 cases in the University of California, but particularly Bakke versus University of California. You'll remember that as through this period of time, that race is viewed as a remedy to discrimination. But with this backlash, we saw that there was a shift, the beginning of a shift. And it certainly happened in Bakke versus University of California, Davis, when the court began to move away from that. And I suggest that, the dissenting opinion of Thurgood Marshall in that case is instructive, because Thurgood Marshall in 1977, 78 warned us. He said, listen, this is a big issue. All this past discrimination, everything that you've done to these people of African descent, and the discrimination and the deprivation of resources, et cetera. This is a problem, and you guys are not approaching this right. I dissent from how you're viewing this. Then we move forward to other cases, moving into the 80s, election of Ronald Reagan, and there's some support then for this whole backlash. And now we fast forward, the courts are moving, they say no longer race, is going to be diversity. Diversity. And now we're at a place where they say, at least the administration says, that diversity in inclusion should be outlawed essentially, but has no place. So the climate is serious and it's different. And we made a lot of progress, and we've appreciated education in an incredible way. 27% of Blacks over age 25%, over age 25, have earned bachelor's degrees. That's a substantial number. And a lot of attention is given by organizations like NAFIO, Leslie Baskerville, and I was reading a report by Dr. Joyce Payne. They have a report, The Lasting Value and Impact of an HBCU Education, Proof of Promise, published just last month, July 2026. Let's drill down a little bit on HBCUs. And one of the things we really have to contextualize as we think about them, sure they matter. We have 100 or so HBCUs against the backdrop of 3,800 degree granting institutions in the United States. And in these HBCUs, we're really talking about a cadre of about 300,000 students in range annually, 300,000 students. Against a backdrop right now, literally as I'm talking to you, there are about 12.5 million Black Americans under the age of 18. Most of these students who want to go to school are not going to be able necessarily to go to HBCUs. At the same time, the predominantly white institutions, as a result of this anti-DEI policy and mindset, are reducing their numbers and doors are closing. So we have a problem that we have to confront. Sure, we need HBCUs, but there's a bigger question. Is that going to be enough? What else do we need to do in that process? And I want to examine that a little bit more and add to that, just talking aloud, when we think about HBCUs, there's a number of lawyers and doctors and the like on this call, or dentists and the like. But when we look at it and we look at what's going on when our students can't get into these larger schools, the numbers in the HBCU schools, we're talking about 6 law schools, 1 or 2 dental schools, for medical schools, it's going to become restrictive. So we're driving down a lane now where there's going to be some serious impediments to our students outside of HBCUs, getting into schools outside of HBCUs and having limited HBCU capacity. What do we do? The financing is significant. There's structural changes at the HBCUs in terms of their ability to maintain their infrastructures and the like. Against that backdrop, there are people who well understand, including those people who deal with these issues every day in the Congress and in state houses, whether it's in Florida or whether it's here in DC. The money gets very funny when it comes to HBCUs and the restrictions that are being imposed and that we can expect. On one hand, the president does a report saluting HBCUs, and on the other hand, there's a lot of scrutiny, at least from the one side of the aisle on the Republican side, that goes into whether they're going to give the money to the state and federal and I say state universities, and I would say congressionally chartered, which Howard is. So these narratives are compelling, and we had to pay a little bit more attention to them. And when I say that, I want to say that it also, at least in my view, against the culture. Right now, we are under a unique kind of attack, and it's kind of comprehensive. So on one hand, there's the education, which is connected to the political. The political is essentially what we see in the voting rights space. And then you go from the political to the cultural in what we see in terms of the attacks on Black history and culture, the Smithsonian Executive Order 14253, and what that says about truth and the erasure of what they consider to be untruths in terms of Black history. So we're under attack economically, the removal and downsizing of the government and taking of jobs and the like. And so we have to be very, very, very sensitive as how these things interplay. I want to talk about it briefly and move then, knowing that to my experience at Howard, and primarily in the areas of governance and accountability. I was a student government leader. I was involved as a student in a lot of things, drafting the student government organization, undergraduate student assembly constitution as a junior. My family, I was the first to go to college. My brother and sister went to Howard. My daughter, as I mentioned, my cousins went to Howard. Their kids went to Howard and FAMU. And so Howard has meant something substantially, to us. I was working on Capitol Hill in '89 and got a phone call from students, and they wanted me to come over to the administration building. Some of the students on this line had taken over Ross Baraka, April Silver. They'd taken over the school, and they were concerned about a number of issues at the administration. And that was my first introduction to how students are thinking. I was impressed. The students were organized to a letter. They had systems, they had rules. They wanted to negotiate with the administration. They didn't want to be retaliated against at any of these student protests. They wanted the opportunity to voice their dissent, and they felt they were excluded from the process. That particular protest ended in a negotiation. And I learned a lot about, at least in that particular situation, the Howard students. Just immediately the next year, the students took over at UDC, and I got the same phone call. And Mark Thompson, who's a media personality now, Reverend Mark Thompson, was the student leader. Their student movement was titled Kiamsha, The Awakening. It was an incredible protest, and it was extremely well organized again. And they had certain demands that were very impressive, but literally meeting in boardrooms with specific requests, very structured and deliberate analysis. And then with the support of people like Reverend Willie Wilson and Jesse Jackson and others, and that resulted in a negotiation that was meaningful and that protected the students. In 2018, there were housing problems at Howard, and those housing problems were not isolated to Howard. There are other schools that had those same problems. And again, the students were incredibly impressive. Incredibly impressive. One of their issues was student rape kits and the issue of student rapes. And in 10 days, those students, and I anecdote this because of the mindset that students can offer very little at certain levels is mythological. In that particular situation, Dr. Reed Tuckson was then on the board at Howard University. Dr. Reed Tuckson and the students met during that 10-day protest, and they developed an academically sound, a well-written policy and practice that altered something that the board and the administration wasn't able to do for years. And so that protest also ended in a meaningful resolution. In 2021, similar problems occurred again with regard to student housing and conditions, and the students protested again. And there were meetings again, meetings with the provost, meetings with the lawyers, meeting with the president of the university. And the students were incredible. They were impressive. They would have meetings and they would say things like, we're going to have these meetings here, but they would determine where the meetings would be, the agenda of the meetings, and the decorum of the meetings. The students said to the administration, these people 50, 60, and 70 years old, they said, listen, we're going to have a meeting. You're not going to talk over us, though. When students talk, you can't interrupt, and men will not be talking over women. This is coming from students. So that was incredible. And it was a learning experience for me because I realized at the same time that Howard, at that point in time, had a longstanding and constitutional, for that matter, and there was bylaws. They were required to have 7 stakeholder seats on the board: 2 students, 2 faculty, and 3 alumni, all elected by their respective stakeholders. Didn't just happen, though. It happened in 1926, because the alumni felt that they wanted to be part of that empowerment equation. As former students, Howard was formed in 1867, especially particularly to address a mission of truth and service, but for students, not Black students, for youth. But the legislative intent was for youth who had not been able to be educated because obviously the condition of enslavement. So Howard was formed, and in just a few years later, between 1867 and 1924, an impressive group, and it's well documented, beautifully documented, of alumni passionately and very elegantly penned their thoughts and challenged the university, so much so that the House of Representatives agreed and said, well, listen, these alumni need to be involved. They are former students and they have something to say about the university's future. And there were oversight hearings. The university actually, subject to these protests, agreed. And in 1925 and 26, Howard elected its first alumni trustees. In 1968, the students, and you all know about the students like Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, and others, they protested and they wanted seats on the board. In 1970, students and faculty, as a result of these student protests, earned elected seats on the board. But the university, not unlike other universities, because there's a lot of shifts going on now throughout the country, other universities, they rejected something that was longstanding, and they decided that this should no longer exist. So they removed students, faculty, and alumni, elected student, faculty, and alumni from the board. We, in that particular case, which is pending, we disagreed. we asked them, hey, listen, talk to us, alumni. Some of them are in this group here. You know, we have 50 years of student leaders say, listen, what are you doing? Talk to us. Why are you doing this? And did you have a vote at the board level on this? And they did not. And we said, listen, we like to resolve this. We love Howard. We want alumni to be involved. And the question was whether they would be involved from a democratic point of view or from a dictatorial point of view. Whether you're going to tell the alumni you want on the board, or whether we would ourselves vote and examine and think about this. This is an interesting structural question because there are so many deep politics and so many deep thoughts about that. And as we look at the boards of trustees at these respective HBCUs, they deserve scrutiny because some of their views are archaic and antiquated. And then there are other dynamics associated with that having to do with many times financial accountability and governance accountability. And at Howard, we really did everything we could not to have to engage our university in any type of litigation. University resisted aggressively. And with all due respect to my beloved alma mater, it was some of the it was horribly condescending. And we were required, therefore, to file a lawsuit against the university, which we did. And we filed a lawsuit in state court. They moved it to the federal court. They argued that there was federal jurisdiction because of the 1867 congressional charter. We lost. We lost. They filed a motion to dismiss. We challenged the motion to dismiss, but we argued that it shouldn't have been in the federal court. University hired a big firm, a huge firm. The firm is Hogan Laval, one of the largest firms in the city. We appealed it to the DC Circuit, and we won, and the case got reversed. And now, 5 years later, literally as we speak, we're now in the state court again, and where we have filed a summary judgment, the Court of Appeals and the Federal Circuit said it is a bylaw issue. We got to look at these bylaws and pay attention to these bylaws, but it's really a governance question. I mean, why are we fighting? Fundamentally, we talk about HBCU, why are alumni fighting boards of trustees, whether it's at FAMU, Tuskegee, North Carolina, it doesn't matter. Why are we fighting each other, given the sanctity and significance and limitations of HBCUs? And I'll talk about that in closing, why alumni are important. So that case now, we will have a hearing on August 28th. And it's interesting that we're not the only ones fighting. We see the battles at Yale and Dartmouth. This is a fundamental question, is the role of alumni in the governance of institutions. But we have been front and center there. And that goes to our feeling and our sentiment ideologically about alumni and students and their roles. I would say that in both situations, these experiences have been diagnostic for purposes of HBCUs. The students, whether it's at Howard or wherever they are, they have forced the examination of really structural issues at the university and the role of students and the value of students, but not only that, their right to dissent. The right of students to challenge the administration, whether it's in the newspaper, whether it's in student government, but to say, hey, listen, we respectfully disagree. Similarly, the right of alumni to have meaningful discourse with the universities, but even within the universities themselves, the manner in which the universities embrace alumni dissent, it is not insignificant to me, and certainly heartbreaking in some respects when we read a writing by our beloved university, and the university writes that alumni and students have no rights under the bylaws, essentially regarding the future of the university that we love and cherish. Now, the university would say we do have rights, but we're going to decide who's on the board, and we're going to create ways for you that we think is right. But this is not the way that it's been developed. It's not what the students have fought for over the last 50 years, and alumni have fought for the last 100 years. So that's to say that we need to closely, as we think about HBCUs, ensure they should exist, but we need to really do some introspection about governance at HBCUs and the boards on HBCUs and who's on the boards and what they offer. There's obviously a good question. How are people selected to these respective boards? And certainly some of the schools are public and some of them are private, and they have varying dynamics associated with that. But board composition matters. And the politics of the board, the aspirations of the board matters. But in my view, boards need to have people certainly from the financial sector, but the legal sector, educational sector, has to have a student perspective, has to have a cultural perspective, a global perspective, some institutional memory about the alumni experience. It has to have generational diversity. Our boards have become elite centers of people that basically speak a language that they only speak and hear. And as a result, there are things that are happening in our universities, our HBCUs in particular here, that are very dated and archaic and time-consuming and expensive to the university's health. We live in a space where technology and artificial intelligence are accelerating change and require the different thinking in terms of the curriculum and what we're giving to our students. We're living in an age where over 650,000 English-speaking Africans and young people there are also looking for education. And over here, we're depending on 99 out of 100 times with somebody else to subsidize our education, to fund our education. We're not being innovative enough against the backdrop of technology and opportunity. The cultural question is a fundamental question. The extent to which assimilation informs how we think and what we compromise in terms of the history and a sense of our own values. Education is connected to politics. Politics is connected to economics. But values is the connection between all these things. And if we don't have those values, I mean, you can have, and we get people on this call, you have many advanced degrees. You can have an MBA, 2 JDs, PhD, MDs. It doesn't matter if you don't have the value framework in terms of those things that Charlie Houston aspired to ensure that we have education to empower our community. And so those boards should reflect that. And some of those things are uncompromising. I was doing a little reading today about predominantly white schools, and I was curious to look at some of the racial compositions of some of these schools. I don't have to, what it was. It took me someplace differently though, and it was like the first 25 of these predominantly white schools where they were 100% white were actually small, all white Jewish schools with Jewish mandates, and they were more religious oriented. I thought that was interesting because I thought that within that framework, people who have strong values, they don't compromise those values. And Black people should not compromise those values in any way, notwithstanding what Executive Order 14253 says or anything else. But our struggle has been too dynamic and too incredible for us to compromise our values. And that's one of the issues that was the students raised in the 1990 student protests and in the 1968 protests at Howard and continuing on. And so against that, I just want to make 2 other points and I'll stop. But some years ago, I did a TEDx talk on technology and its social implications, and we see that technology is really pervasive and ominous in our lives, and artificial intelligence is really taking us to places we cannot even imagine, and at a speed we can't imagine. And so we have to factor that in as well when we're talking about our HBCUs across the board, as small and some of them are struggling differently, et cetera. But we need to be more collaborative uh, uh, in with this framework in mind, but also with what technology and artificial intelligence brings in terms of our capacity, both domestically and internationally. Uh, our schools, and I know this because I've seen it. I've seen it on the continent when I was in Zambia and looking at the Morehouse Medical Program there and and other African countries and the relationships that they do or don't have with African American, well, with HBCUs. And I've seen on the other side of that coin what in Qatar, where the American schools have relationships with these foreign countries, but we have these senses. There's so much possibility, and there's so much that we can do, including in the Caribbean and on the continent, in terms of the collaboration through artificial intelligence and technology to expand HBCU capacity, to have a greater strength and probably to be able to develop resources. I'm going to close by just making a couple of suggestions. And I'm talking out loud because this is a conversation as a non-expert, so there's a disclaimer, but based on my experiences, 48 years practicing law and teaching and litigating, a few things. And one of them is governance. We've got to check the governance. If HBCUs are going to be around, that we can't have these same old people, of which I'm one, just speaking and being condescending and patronizing and having archaic views and not being receptive. And I'm not talking about rhetorically receptive to how these boards are structured, but particularly in terms of how you're going to have a university that does embrace its alumni in a meaningful way, almost as a second-class status, or its students, and in a meaningful way. I think that has to be addressed. Alumni have to do more. We as alumni have to do more for these institutions. And it doesn't have to be singularly. I think it should be collaboratively. Fundraising is critical. Alumni we give money, we mentor, we employ, we have professional skills we share. I mean, alumni are an invaluable resource. And I think that needs to be really underscored and intensified in this whole debate about the strengths of HBCUs. We have to restructure the curriculum. I see students all the time. I have students working for me, undergrad Howard, law school Howard, and the like, and even high school. We had to restructure the curriculum to make sure that the curriculum is much more competitive and much more meaningful. It should be culturally grounded, technologically sophisticated, and competency driven. And then in terms of the money, people like Leslie Baskerville, who may be on this call, and others know, they know the money and how it works in the federal and state government, but we need to be a lot more sophisticated about those dollars and make sure there's an equitable distribution of those monies. And we need to be much more vocal about those government policies, practices, and the budget decisions in terms of the HBCUs, but not only HBCUs, but students, our access to higher education as a rule. And lastly, well, not next to last, I would say this, is that I've been privileged to go to school to come out of North Philly, then ultimately to go to Howard and go abroad to school and to travel throughout the continent and the Caribbean. I think that we have to move away from the centralized notion of just and centralized and isolated in a way of Black Americanness versus diasporaness, which means that we need to connect. There's so many things that are going on, even as close, I mean, in the Caribbean, whether it's in Jamaica, whether it's in the Virgin Islands, things that are happening that we need to hone into and to connect to, because the education demand is there, and we have the capacity to inform and to respond to them. And certainly on the continent, in so many spaces, I think we need to rethink how we think fundamentally about that. In the next 5 years, they say that the consumer spending power of Black Americans is going to approach about $2.8 trillion. And that leads to this last point, is that our thinking is oftentimes in the last century, we need to change the way that we think about how we think. You can't have access to $2.8 trillion and have the educational bandwidth that we have and experience and cultural bandwidth that we have, connectivity that we have with. And then the question is of the hour about HBCUs is fundamentally this, is that if we don't have the money for the HBCUs, if this administration and some of its policies and practices continue, and we don't have the access. I had a conversation with a kid at Stanford. He was talking to me. He's graduated. And he said, listen, this particular program is changing. These numbers are changing, whether it's Stanford or whether it's George. Well, I can't say that with all these schools, but a lot of these schools, the numbers, it's going to be harder. And they're decreasing the access, the programs, the funding. We all know that. But if that happens, and the HBCUs can't be the only game in town for us. It simply can't be the only game in town. They're housing 300,000 students, 100 HBCUs. And what are y'all going to do? What are we going to do? What are our children going to do? What are our students going to do? But then it begs the question, doesn't it? If we have if we're spending $2.8 trillion and we have all these doctors, lawyers, engineers, and MBAs and BAs, Carter G. Woodson spoke about it in the Miseducation of the Negro. He said it doesn't matter if that knowledge and those resources and that capacity is being used to develop and to build our community. And so fundamentally, we have to rethink the equation. And it seems to me, maybe Higgy, we talk about HBCUs, certainly, but maybe it's time as we move into this 21st century, and it'd be well beyond my life, that we start thinking about how we develop our own institutions that are self-sufficient, that where we watch how we spend our money, we redirect our spending, we develop new models, because as long as we have to depend on others to finance our liberation, to finance our children's education, and to preserve our legacy, then we're going to be in a perpetual crisis mode. And I think that pretty much says it all, is that in the new thinking, certainly Kwame Ture always talked about this, and A. Philip Randolph, he talked about it, the question of the organizations that we have and the structures that we have to rethink them and move into being more collaborative, more self-sustaining, more self-deliberative mode. So that's my thoughts for the conversation.
Great. Thank you for your thought. Didn't realize I was muted. Sorry. Sorry about that. Thank you for your thoughts on the conversation. They were much appreciated. And now is the time that you all can engage in conversation or questions, whatever you have that you want to contribute to the conversation. I like the way that, Donna, you incorporated like all of the schools. We're all in the same boat. I find it interesting, and I meant to reach out to the guy from Shaw, because Shaw actually is dealing with the same issue that Howard dealt with in terms of having stakeholders kicked off of their board. Their property is being sold. Prime property, because gentrification is an issue. Like when you think about the ways that we're under attack, gentrification is another, because we are in prime areas, a lot of us, and it's property that folks want. So who's our administration and who's sitting around our tables? Does anybody, I'm going to look through the chats. I saw a few questions there, but if somebody has a question, just raise your hand and you can come on and ask them, or a comment. It doesn't have to be a question. Dr. Lyons, I see a few people here know who you are. So Dr. Lyons is going to be a future guest when we talk about HBCUs from an administration perspective. But anybody want to ask any question? This is your time. I'm going to peruse the chats.
Miss Helen.
Bridget. Okay, wait a minute. I see a hand. Bridget Rusum, go ahead. And then Sherry, I think that's you. And then Erica. Go ahead, Miss Rusum.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's Bridget Rusan Wilson, Howard alum, great fan of yours, Donald, as always. And I know that, and you just spoke about it, that you are an internationalist, which is what we must be in order to have liberation. I'm wondering what thoughts you have about, what's the main possibility, what's the main challenge in terms of this reduction of the ability of Black folks to emigrate to the United States and attend academic institutions, flashing of immigration from African nations. And then your thoughts about the impact of the shakedown of higher ed institutions in order to control them. So if these large, predominantly white institutions that have the money are bowing to the throne, what do we need to be prepared for with HBCU?
Not getting everything. Did you catch that, Donald?
Generally, I mean,
it's in the chat.
Yeah. I mean, Bridget, I really can't expound on this immigration dynamic other than what we already know. I mean, it's very serious, it's very aggressive, it's very concerning. The amount of money that the government has spent on ICE, presumably for immigration purposes. I'm concerned there that it's not exclusively for immigration purposes. I was listening to C-SPAN the other day, and I heard former Senator Tim Wirth say something that it really struck me. The guy said, I'm concerned about these elections and whether these elections are going to take place in November. And I was saying, now that's interesting coming from a retired senator, but I think we should all be watching that generally. But in terms of what's going to happen with those policies, it all goes back to the midterm elections in 2026 and the practices regarding immigration, Haitians, including what we saw with the TPS, with the Haitians and the like. So we need to pay attention to that, and not because it's an immigration issue, but because of the larger question as we're thinking, we thinking 2025, 2035, 2045, the future, what our relationships are like with these communities, both in the African diaspora, part of the African and Caribbean diasporas. So to that, I can say that's my concern. And as terms of the political issues, we need to be all hands on deck. I mean, the next 90 days, it ain't about the wobble and all that stuff. We need to be figuring out what's happening. It's a drop dead serious time. What's going to happen if you can, if we have to live another 2 years through these types of attacks, structural attacks in terms of education, policies, practices, and funding, coupled with what we see in terms of voting rights and the disenfranchising of African American communities in particular, we're going to have a problem. And so
we certainly know. I know that Howard has lost $64 million to their budget for this academic year. I don't know what's happening with the other schools, but I'm going to guess, given the climate of this administration, that it's probably and it's not just the government. We have to look at our philanthropic organizations that are also backing away from DEI or giving any impression that they support, things that are geared towards culturally or racially based situations. Erica, I think you're driving, and I'm going to let you go. And then Sherry, you're next. Erica, are you still there?
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, first, I'm really glad to see DT on as the speaker for today. When he was talking about the protest in 2021, he was the one that represented us. So thank you, DT, for that. I shout you out for that. It's as well as like the other previous student protests on Howard's campus in recent history. I mentioned in the chat too about the issues with the boards at these schools. and people that are sellouts and act as if they are there to support us, but really, I guess I'll say, are wolves in sheep's clothing. It's concerning to me when people start taking away things that are supposed to be like voting rights of on these school boards, especially for a place like Howard. I remember they made it was a huge story when Hannah Nicole Jones came to Howard from UNC Chapel Hill. I'm in North Carolina, so I remember her coming. How she was supposed to be confirmed, I think, for the board at UNC Chapel Hill, and it was a student member.
What does this
She was a
require?
student member
It
at UNC
requires
Chapel
linking.
Hill. Who's sit again?
No, go ahead.
Oh, it
Go
was
ahead.
a student member. It was a student member of the board who actually said, "No, Miss Jones, like she needs to be confirmed. Like we need to make sure that she has a fair hearing and to be able to vote on it." And they did not want to let her. She ended up getting confirmed, but then she left and went to Howard instead, which was very ironic to me. Howard opened welcomed her with open arms, which they as they should, but it was very odd and ironic to me that the reason she ended up at Howard was because of that um, something that happened that Howard has now done away with. So we brought her into Howard, but we now don't have student representation on our board. So I don't know if the irony is lost on administration and the board at Howard. But that was very odd and ironic to see.
That's a really good
And
observation. I hadn't thought of that. I'm sure you have, Donald.
Well, I think she hits it now. But I think one thing as we talk about, we got to remember these historic Black colleges and universities are sacred ground. I mean, I gave you the backdrop of the history. I mean, and people wanting to learn to read and write, to get a higher education, and whether it's at Cheney, Shaw, Wilberforce, Howard, it's invaluable. Now, when you talk about why this matters, and this is 2026, and that we also need to look at the rising tuitions, the ability of these universities to compete. I mean,
Affordability.
the Howard concerns me, but you mentioned, you know, gentrification. Every HBCU is not predominantly Black either. We saw that with West Virginia State,
Bluefield
and
State.
Bluefield State. We also see it with other schools. And then when you go to the HBCU graduate schools, they're also significant other populations. And so these are not our quote unquote our schools, but our students, significant numbers of our students attend these schools. So it's important. But as the tuition increases, we need to be mindful and we need to watch it. And we saw that the disenrollment situation at Howard was interesting, but it wasn't interesting only in terms of disenrollment. What was significant was that we were being told that to attend the university, it would cost $60,000 to $70,000, or whether it's Spelman or Morehouse or other schools. These are the best schools. These are incredible schools in terms of the Black experience. I mean, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of exhibits of people who've gone to these schools and they're doing incredible work, and they do well for what the aspirations were in terms of the creation of these schools, And so, but now, if this is 2026 and we start looking at the projections and the ability of these schools to continue to compete, if it's what happens when Howard is 80,000 or Morehouse is $80,000, and these dynamics to these schools. So we need to be protective in terms of how we think about this. And I don't know the answer to it, but to the extent that these schools matter, and then you see the numbers start shifting when in 2090, you saying, wait a minute, is Howard's 50% Black or, to that extent.
I think, Donald, for me, it goes to what is the mission of these schools? The historical mission of these schools was to provide opportunities for people that look like us. Let's be clear, because we couldn't go to those other schools. And we would not be going to those other schools but for civil rights legislation. And it really hurt our schools because in a lot of instances, the ice is colder or whatever, we went to the other school, to the PWI schools. But I remember interviewing for a teaching gig, and I'll say it was at Cheney, and I interviewed with a white guy. And Cheney, some of these schools have become state institutions, so that puts them in a different category as to what they can and cannot do because now they're bound by state regulations on hiring. This guy said he didn't even know what an HBCU was until he came to Cheney. Somebody needs to mute. I'm not sure who that is. Wait a minute, it's Penny. Okay, yeah, but this guy didn't even know what an HBCU was until he landed at Cheney. And that was disheartening. And I saw maybe 2, 3 people. I never saw interview with anybody that was Black. Everybody was white. So you have to ask yourself at our schools what kind of, and Erica talked to the board membership. What kind of vetting are we doing? What kind of vetting should we be doing? So even if you're not Black as a student, as a faculty member, what are your receipts? Have you been involved in the Black community? Do you understand? Are you committed to the mission of the Black school? Do you respect the students that want to be there to serve? Those are the kinds of things that we need to be asking and not be shy about it.
They're not at all. And to your point, or you or DT said that these spaces are sacred ground. One of the things that I kept hearing over and over with the unenrollment issue at Howard was like, oh, well, it's still a business. It's still a business. Yes, you were in the business of educating Black students, but the process in which the manner in which Howard handles issues like this is not, it doesn't feel sacred. It doesn't feel like it's a sacred place to be if that's how they're going to continue to handle issues, because they did admit there was a comms issue with this. And that makes me think about the other HBCUs that are going through issues like this that happen every year. These are sacred grounds. Homecoming is sacred. HBCUs are sacred. It can't just be a business.
Well, the thing about it is, and I think Sheila Vance, who was an attorney at Cheney, there I remember visiting, meeting with the president.
That's right, chief of staff.
And so, but I mean, the point too is that we have to adjust and we have to rethink. I mean, our approach is antiquated. I would say our approach across the board is antiquated, and too many of these structural situations. I mean, even our major civil rights organizations are still dependent on others. As long as we're dependent on others for money, they're going to inform the way that we think. But some of these universities need to be collaborative. I mean, the innovation, the governance dynamics, the curriculum. We know these schools can't exist. I mean, you talked about the state school situation. I mean, and you see these schools having closure issues. St. Augustine's, Shaw, they don't have the resources. But we also had to retool. We had to really, I go back to governance. If you give me a university, we took the university apart. We looked at the whole structure of the university. We look at starting with the governance, the administration, the policies and practices. And we say this stuff is archaic. It's dinosaurish. I mean, we're living in 2026 and these people are still thinking the way they were thinking in 1981. I mean, it's obscene. Even some are, I mean, it has to stop. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, it's just, it's almost an elite. It's almost an elitism. It's an intellectual, academic, and class elitism at times, in terms of how they view the crisis of education and the opportunity of education. And Erica made a good point. I mean, sure, you have to look at it in part as a business, but we're going to have a clash. And Thurgood Marshall warned about this because race as a remedy is was significant. You cannot in all the logic in the world look at the history of Black Americans and what's happened in this country in terms of the history of discrimination and say, well, HBCUs should not exist, or that there's not institutional discrimination against Blacks in the education space. I mean, that's well documented. So then the question becomes, so what do we do, particularly in a climate where we can expect that there's going to be a train wreck in this space if the present administration has its way regarding HBCUs or Black culture, Black history, the Smithsonian issues, the voting rights issues, the history of racism. So we have to wake up. We are experiencing something that is drastic and of the highest priority. I mean, these next 90 days are just one component of that. This is almost do or die. Because we go back and you look at it, and I pointed out Dred Scott for a reason. That's an 1857 case, but this whole notion that our people are inferior is ridiculous. But that's an undercurrent of this thing. To go back to pre-1868, we keep hearing about citizenship and birthright citizenship and equal protection rooted in that 14th Amendment, going back and undoing these things. And what would it mean? What would it mean? We already are losing voting rights. What does it mean? What does it mean in terms of these attacks in education? And so we cannot wait for other people. First of all, we can't continue to wait for government to solve our problems, and that's at the HBCU level. I mean, there are people going into board meetings. They're not thinking about what can we do innovatively. What do we need to do to stimulate, educate students and to bring them to an alumni. The alumni are really, and we should point fingers at ourselves too, because alumni is one thing. So I love A&T, I love FAMU, I love Howard, but what does that love mean? It's just because you go to homecoming, to a party or something like that. We had to do better. We had to be more critical of ourselves in terms of our capacity, our resources, and what we needed to do to support these institutions. Not just Black alumni who've gone to these institutions, people who've gone to predominantly white institutions. They need to know the value of that. I mean, just because I went to two predominantly white, it doesn't mean anything. But the relationships that we have, the real issue is not where we go to school. It's the fact that we need to be educating our people, our children, at all levels to make sure they get maximum education opportunities and have some cultural framework and value context for what education means, what Charlie Houston understood and the wars that he fought. Fanny, Mary McLeod Bethune, the work that she put into, organizing Bethune, or Booker T. Washington, those who organized it, or Shaw, or you go back to Cheney. These people were operating in isolation. They had a sense of what education meant, and it did mean something, and it does mean something. But it doesn't mean anything if we're just educated to be educated. It means something if education means that we're thinking about empowerment, not just as African Americans or Africans, but as human beings in a world that's rapidly changing. This notion of our race is significant, but when you put it against the backdrop of technology, it doesn't matter what race you are. Technology doesn't discriminate. And so we're caught up in this kind of thing where we need to rethink how all these different pieces come together and how we're moving. And listen, you can be successful, Higgy. You can be successful. You can make $500,000 a year. You can have a degree. You can have the biggest houses, the biggest cars. The next 10 years and what we're going to see is going to really shake the whole equation up. Can't hear you.
You're muted.
I'm sorry. Somebody dropped in the chat the question when you're talking about technology that students are reconsidering with AI, why do they need to go to college? But they also said in that chat, which is a very good point, that we need to emphasize the need for critical thinking, which you're not going to learn from AI. So that's important.
Well, I don't know.
Sherry, you have a question?
Whether the right analysis of artificial intelligence, number one, artificial intelligence can accelerate exponentially your thinking and learning much more rapidly And so, but the people who have who control it, that's what they're doing. So I mean, if artificial intelligence can teach us how to be more effective in terms of developing a cure to Alzheimer's or dementia, why not? If artificial intelligence can tell us how we can improve our social crises in terms of what's happening in the inner cities with Black teenagers, or to inform quality education for kids at 4, 5, 6 years old. I mean, so I think that how we teach it and how we approach it, and there are programs, including in Black schools and other schools. Uh, um, I went to Santa Clara Law School. They have an incredible innovation technology program. I mean, so I don't agree that artificial intelligence is there. I think that on the flip side of that, with regard to technology, it is a good question, because in terms of the disruption that's going to occur as a result of technological changes, the job market shifts are going to be dramatic. And a lot of people are going to lose jobs in spaces that we're not used to seeing, in law, medicine, accounting, and the like. And so maybe there needs to be some retooling, and we have to think about that in terms of trades. And we all know that, they may become even more competitive and in more demand.
No question. So was Booker, and I'm just throwing this out there, was Booker right?
Book, Booker is
Don't
right, but
judge it.
everybody's right in different ways. I mean,
Mhm.
it depends on what you're talking about. But I mean, what a remarkable man. I visited Tuskegee with Malcolm Beach on having a debate on the Booker T. Washington Du Bois debate. I was so impressed. And one of my sisters went to Tuskegee. I mean, Tuskegee is incredible.
Oh, yeah.
What he did to get there, how he went to do, but what he did in terms of his vision with Tuskegee is one of the most remarkable untold stories in our space.
All right. Yeah. Go ahead,
Helen,
Miss Sherry.
yeah, Helen. Oh, I'm
Uh,
sorry. Somebody else is. Go ahead.
Well, first, let me
Yeah.
say this. You should have been a bulldog. Woo, 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 woo. Spoken from a Wilberforce University alum.
Hey.
Yes, 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 yes,
And a
yes.
proud one at that, we see.
Proud, proud, proud. Let me say this. HBCU, it was not, and I am the generation who, whether you love Cosby or not, and I would say I was groomed from the womb to go to a HBCU, but definitely a different world sealed the
Yes.
deal for me. It sealed the deal. It was nothing else going on. I didn't look at, and I have been researching colleges in that big old book. Remember that big book you could get from the library and look at all the and calling colleges, probably from the time I was in the seventh grade. Cause I knew in my house there was no conversation what your next step was after the 12th grade. There was not a conversation. There was only one way to go. And HBCU, and of course, lived in Tennessee. My parents are originally from Tennessee, but my dad was in the Army, retired in Clarksville. So Tennessee State was up the street. He was like, absolutely not. You're going away because your mama's not going to have me firing up that highway every weekend. You are going away. Bye. Okay. So I was I was kicked out. Went to Wilberforce blindly, had never seen the university. Um, and I got into Spelman. Spelman didn't give me any money. So let me talk about the elitism in education, in the HBCU sphere, right? So I didn't know anything about AME, which Wilberforce is the co-founder of, was African Methodist Episcopal. I was raised a Baptist. So I went blindly and never regret the experience, the best time of my life. So we need to kind of rethink, and I understand, um, Brother Temple, what you're saying, but does it always feel we behind the curveball on something? Like we always trying to do the right thing, and us doing the right thing leads us behind, but we end up still being there. So one, I put in the chat, the boys and uh Booker T. Washington. I think that debate still goes on. And it's not an either or, it's a both and. So I think one way to diversify our institutions is to have them in line with getting some of these industrial professions in there, coupled maybe with a business degree. So you own your own welding company, you own your own whatever. Maybe that I picked Wilberforce at the time because the age old adage was get educated. Then white people picked up the football and said, well, you don't have experience. And at the time, Wilberforce had uh you had to have two mandatory co-ops to graduate. So you had the experience and the degree when you came out. So it's no excuse for you not to, be successful. So I think that was very forward thinking. So I think the age old debate is there, right? Also some of our institutions that were founded as primer schools, right? And so we were in connection with the community, educating those children to come into the HBCUs. I work in the school systems now as a speech language pathologist, and I can tell you that our children can't read. I'm not going to even say be prepared to go to college. They can't read past the fifth grade level right now. And it's a generation of them. So I think one way is for us to kind of shift back into having those collegiate students or those institutions that are in, because you either in the hood or the country. If you were at HBCU, that's two places, hood or country. That's where we are, but we can have that educated effect on it. And thirdly, let me say this. As an alum, I feel like I have tried to do the best that I can. I am not in my alumni association. We don't have one in the area. I usually affiliate with the one in Atlanta, which is 2 hours from me. But let me say this. Those students like myself who came out in the late 90s, we saw a shift in our economic power. And I know the HBCUs didn't see that, but I also think it's a reason for the difference in the giving. When I came out, I had no idea that I would have to go in further debt in order to have a low middle class income. So one, we were trapped. My generation was trapped with the low rate that you could borrow money to be educated, correct? And then in order for us to get a low middle class income, we had to go get advanced degrees in order for us to have a low. And so our buying power wasn't the same. And as we caught our stride, here goes the debacle of the economic 2007. I can tell you I have many friends who didn't know about housing, home ownership, that lost homes, had to file bankruptcy in their early 30s, late 20s when we hit that stride because of the 5-1 arm. And so people were shaming us. You're not giving back. You're coming to homecoming, but you're not giving back. But our precursor was taught to, we were affiliated with our church. A lot of us were in Greek organizations. Then we had children. And then alumni giving was fourth on the list. And some of it we did not have financially as we were raising our families. So I think it was a area of time where alumni giving wasn't as much because a lot of us who benefited from the education just didn't have it to give. I'm still paying on loans, and I didn't take out a lot of loans. Right
But you
now,
know what, Sherry? I understand that. I understand that. But I don't think that there's a reason, a good reason, whatever our circumstances are, not to give something to our, if we have 300,000 alumni who have attended in the last 5 years, just say hypothetically HBCUs, and 300,000 alumni gave $100 a year, it would make a difference. And so to your point, I understand it, but I would say don't give. I say give what you can. And the same way that we go out and we spend money, one thing I can tell you, and I got kids who went to Black schools and I got friends, etc. And the people in this line know this, is that, we do what we really value. And that's why values are important, because if we want to go to homecoming, it's going to cost to go to fly into DC or North Carolina or Ohio, and to look good, to get that vodka martini or whatever you drink or whatever. So all I'm saying in terms of the parties, we can spend $2.8 trillion. Then we got to think about how we think. And whatever it is to do, if my baby need new shoes, my baby gonna get new shoes. You understand what I'm saying? And so I don't think in the rationalization of that, and I understand, because I talk to my children who are grads, and I understand the students work for me. Everybody's struggling. So we put that as a premise. We're all struggling, and people losing their jobs, and the government and businesses are struggling. But here, it starts here in our hearts and in our souls, the souls of Black folk. We got to change how we're feeling this thing and give more of ourselves. You might be in your 30s or so, or whatever you are, and wherever we are, we ain't going to be here forever. But our institutions have to be here well beyond us. And we have to reach beyond our grasp to make that happen. That's why we're having this conversation. It's because we got to do more than what we're doing. And we have to be innovative, creative, and we have to assume more personal discipline and personal sacrifice for our futures. There's 168 hours in a week, 52 weeks in a year. We got a lot of time to do a lot of things, but there are other communities in our country that are doing more with less, and that are organized and strategic. And so I don't know that we really have approached our best minds, in terms of the developing the models, the structures, the organizations, and making the changes that we need to make. Protecting the HBCUs is only one component. That's one lane. You know what I mean? We got all kinds of issues out here confronting our community. And I go back to the next 90 days. We got all these kids that can't read. I think it's atrocious that you have a 10th grader that's reading on a 3rd grade level, or that you have all these single mothers with these kids and this total dysfunctionality in our community and all the emotional problems. And there's a lot of baggage, but we all are wounded. We're all wounded birds. All of us are fundamentally broken pieces of glass of this incredible Black mosaic that we have that has tremendous capacity. We have been the voice of America's humanity. Almost every struggle that we have has made this country a better place. It led to the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment talks about citizenship. It talks about equal protection. It talks about due process. That is a progeny of our struggle. A whole war fought behind that, and to overturn an 1857 decision that said you were inferior, and that all these descendants, that decision said the descendants of these African slaves forever, would never have any rights under the Constitution. So I only say that to say is that we just got to recalibrate and rethink. We got to shed this old thinking and come up with some meaningful ways, some pragmatic ways to deal with protecting our institutions and protecting our legacy and our interest.
Yeah, we have to ask ourselves, I put it in the chat, are we behind the 8 ball? Have we allowed ourselves to be silenced into not being seen in a certain way? So we just didn't advocate for ourselves as forcefully or protect our legacy, because that's what I think we haven't done a good job of protecting our legacy. But anyway, thank you, Sherry. We're going to move on because we got a few questions, and I don't want to hold people up for much longer. Thank you, Sherry. Always your I know she's
Thank you, Joe.
proud. Sheridan, and there was a male. I don't know who the male was that was trying to speak. And Dr. Lyons, I want you to put
That
your.
was
I saw you.
me. That was me
Oh,
trying to speak.
okay. Hold on. Let me. Sheridan's
But
been
go
waiting for
ahead
a
to
minute.
Sheridan. Sure.
Let
Okay,
Dr.
Sheridan,
Lyons.
go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say you can let Dr. Lyons speak if you wish.
Okay. Well, Dr. Lyons, you guys, yes, Dr.
Well,
Lyons.
let me first of all just thank DT, if I may call you that.
Sure.
I won't blame you for I won't blame your presentation for the reason that I have finally retired after 4 attempts and 53 years of service. But you really laid out just a whole breadth of challenges that we have, and just trying to figure out what we deal with, how we deal with it. I can say to you now as a former president, in the past 24 hours, I've been asked a question about whether the consortium we're talking with West Africans about HBCUs and partnering, whether that's going to take place, whether AI really will eliminate the needs of going to college, and whether I should keep my child at Virginia State given what's happened. Now, these are three questions that I've been asked as a former president within the past 24 hours. So my point is that there are so many issues and they're complex issues and there's no simple solution that we've got to sit down and we've got to figure it out. We are wounded, I agree with you, but we've got to figure it out, you know, and it's going to take many of the folk on this phone call to continue doing what you're doing to search out solutions to the many complex issues. And I'm going to be talking at another meeting, a future meeting, about some of the things that DT mentioned from a president's perspective, just to share that piece of it, because I had to, as every time we talked about the sacred ground, and my wife is a Wilberforce graduate as well, but every time we talked about the sacred ground, I reflect on sitting before an accreditation body having to ask questions about student performance, financial stability, et cetera, et cetera. And my sacred ground argument didn't go very far, so there's some real challenges, DT, and I thank you for lifting them up as you did today. And as I said, those folk on this call will have to be the folk to figure it out. So
Dr.
thank you.
Lyons, I really
Yeah.
appreciate your words and that making that distinction, because I think, you know, you have to keep the lights on. You have to give students infrastructural security and quality education. But I think that money and understanding money, and the young lady spoke about it, from her situation as Wilberforce, and you speak about it as a former university president. But understanding money and what money means and how we develop the economic capacity to protect our institutions is a major challenge. But in the process of examining the question, and we see that at Howard, those people on our board believe they know best about money, maybe because they are wealthy people, but our universities have existed for a long time and survived in with variations of competencies. And so I think that one gift we have is that you have, whatever the school is, Wilberforce included, and Cheney and Howard and A&T and certainly FAMU, these are dynamic places with alumni that love the schools. But you can't treat love in a bad way, because then it won't grow, right? And so when you talk to these presidents, And they have to get out of their minds this patronizing, condescending sentiment. And they may talk to alumni and tell them, I love you, Mr. Wilson or so-and-so. I love what you're a doctor now, you're a lawyer now. But that's superficial, and so we had to be organized, innovative. We had to find a way to make these things. Other people do it. Other people do it at other schools that I've attended. They do it. They treat people in a meaningful way. They find ways to not disrespect them. Can you imagine writing a brief filed in a court of law? It says in the brief to alumni, faculty, and students, you have no rights under our bylaws to challenge us. And so that's old, and we'll continue to fight that struggle. That's old, but when we come together, maybe there needs to be a national, and then we need to be very serious about these discussions. You're a serious man, you have a serious experience. Alumni need to be equally serious, and we need to find ways. Because what I'm really saying is this, and I go back to the next 90 days as a predicate. These are do or die times. Today we see these universities, but we're already seeing the decay and some of these universities in critical conditions. And whether they're going to be there in 20 years is another story. Whether they're going to be there and look like they look in 20 years is another story. But that's on our fingers, our fingerprints. That's something we
suggested excuse me, Doc, somebody suggested in the chats, should some of these schools be combined?
Sheila,
like yours,
Sheila mentioned that. I mean, listen, Higgy, maybe there needs to be some deep thinking. Maybe there needs to be some colloquial discussion with faculty. I mean, with these boards, these presidents. And we haven't talked about the faculty. I mean, there are people who, one of my classmates is former university president. She's also, I think, is on here. And she was a professor at FAMU as well. I mean, the faculty kind of know where the bones are buried a lot of times. And certainly there's a clash between the faculty and the administration sometimes because of management and money issues. I get that. But if we're going to have if we have a family, and the university is a family, the university is designed to benefit students first, and the students become alumni, then we need to be collaborative, we need to be critical, we need to open our minds and debate. If you can't debate me because you disagree with me, then ain't nothing going to go down. But if you want to debate me on the subject, we put it on the table, and I'm not going to be punished because I disagree with you, then we're going to have a product that's going to be fruitful and beneficial for the universities. And maybe within the framework of that, we'll find something that's innovative, that's creative, to deal with that question that you posed. Why the sacred ground is really sacred and how we can preserve it.
Before I let you go, Dr. Lyons, now first of all, I wanted to tell you all that Dr. Lyons will be back in a couple of weeks, and we're going to continue this conversation from the administration's perspective, because it's easy for us to talk as students, as alumni, but there are some practical issues that we just don't know because we haven't sat in those chairs. He has been at a few HBCUs and PWIs, so he will be able to talk with us more in depth about that perspective. But before you go, Dr. Lyons, just very briefly tell us about your book and where we can get it, and maybe some of us will have purchased it before you come and meet with us. You're muted.
That would be a lot of fun if you have purchased it before we meet again. And I'm not trying to give a marketing pitch. I have no plans to make Oprah's list. But there's a lot of stuff in there. There's a lot of stuff in there that people talk about, so you need to know that my mother left Rocky Mount, North Carolina as a young woman who decided that picking tobacco was not her future. So she traveled right up to the 95 corridor and ended up in Connecticut. And I was born in New Haven, Connecticut. And there were a whole lot of folk in North Carolina from Connecticut. And they brought with them some things. And so we've had some experiences. And I talk about that in the book. I also talk a lot about, choosing friends and making decisions, some of which are life-ending, life-threatening, potentially so. When I talk about my homeboys telling the police that I broke into a laundromat and burglarized it, and only to be told 20 years later that they did it because they loved me, and they didn't want me away. They didn't want me to go away to the university and separate myself from them. And that's what they told my sons that story. I didn't even know it myself. Um, if someone just said the name of the book is From the Projects to the Presidencies, and it sort of chronicles that whole experience. There's a big section in there related to my wife and some of the career decisions she made to try to be supportive. So there's a lot of stuff in there. I didn't embarrass. I tried not to embarrass any institutions and call them out by name. Um, yes, there's someone asked about mergers. Yes, there are several schools that should have merged. And had they merged 25 years ago, 30 years ago, they'd be in much better shape. I won't identify them, but there's several instances that you all can probably think of where now you got two or three struggling institutions and they, with the thought, and that's what I'm saying about really sitting down, as DT mentioned, what should things look like 10 years out, 15 years out? And what will they look like if we don't do anything? We can answer that question, perhaps what they will look like if we don't do anything, but what can we do to be an influence? So I look forward to coming back, not as though I'll bring all the answers back. I got a lot of questions still, DT. I'm still asking questions after 53 years out there, man, and 28 as a college president, 28 total. So look forward to talking to you all in a few weeks. I'll get with you, our distinguished chair lady, and we'll put a date together and just look forward to it.
Yeah, Dr. Lyons, I put in the chats the name of the book. Where can they purchase? Do you have a link where people can purchase the book, or
Well,
you?
most of the people I talked to have just gone to Amazon and picked it up,
Yeah.
and also the University Press of Mississippi is the publisher. The University Press of Mississippi, so it can be purchased directly from them.
I'll look. I haven't looked, but I tend to have a lot of luck, everybody, when I look for books because I'm trying to not support Amazon. Thriftbooks.com. So I'll put that in the chats too. I haven't looked there. It might be there. Yeah, somebody said boycott Amazon. We're mad at Amazon.
All right. I
But yeah,
didn't know that. Okay.
that's okay. No, but sometimes, I think people are still going there. Thriftbooks.com. And if anybody else knows somewhere else that you can get books, particularly if it's a Black place, that's great.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you, Dr. Lyons, and we will circle back with you and maybe one or two more administrators just to get a perspective of what's happening from that perspective. Because we all, most of us have been students, if not at HBCUs, a student somewhere, so we know that perspective, but we don't get to hear what are the challenges. And you and I have talked a little bit, and I think people will be very surprised at some of the challenges that you face as an administrator at an HBCU. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sheridan, are you still with us, my dear?
Yes, I'm with you. I am still with you.
Hi.
I was happy to hear what Dr. Lyons and Dr. Temple had to say. I taught at an HBCU for 16 years. And when I first got there, I had to say, I got there in 2003. And I had been at a PWI for 20 years before. And I couldn't believe the state of the university, the college, university. It was a university. I thought it was a whole different century. So yes, we have a long way to go. But I want to just focus in on a couple of things. One is the quality of the students when they come to the university, because they're not coming with the same level of competency, but the university doesn't make the university I taught at, for example, didn't seem to have the resources or the capacity to help the students get from where they were to where they ought to be in order to perform at a collegiate level. So that's something I want to throw out, Dr. Lyons, for you to address when you come back. Because when I went to school, there was a program called the EOF program, And that allowed students to come in, and that first year, they would take all the courses they need to get up to snuff. I also was an executive director at a New Jersey Institute of Technology in New Jersey. And that's what we did. We went and got the students, and that summer we brought them on campus and we got them ready. And I hired all the top faculty. And I said to them, your job is to bring these students up and have them compete in September with everybody else that's coming in. And I said, tell me what you need to get paid, and you'll be paid, because that's your job. And so we have to figure out how to get the students so they can compete at the level they need to compete. We also need to get the faculty to stop with the great inflation. That's a big challenge, and I want to throw that out to you, Dr. Lyons. So whenever you come back, I'll be here. I want to hear what you have to say about those two things. Dr. Temple, I totally agree with you on the alumni. I served on my alumni board, and my eyes were open to how they make money, how they raise money. And part of the challenges also was how we treat our students as undergrads and as grads. There's nothing that my alumni could not ask me for that I wouldn't try to give it to them. I endowed a scholarship at my alumni, right? And I was a teacher. I took a lot less money to go teach at this HBCU because they treated me so well as an undergrad that I will give them anything they wanted. But we have to treat our students better as undergrads, so when they come out, they are really in love with us and will have the money to give us. And the last thing I'm going to say is about alumni. I couldn't understand why my there may be a reason, I don't know what it is, but 25,000 people come into campus for was it homecoming? And if you tagged on $50 to every person who's coming for alumni, a one-time fee. We understand fees now, right? Because you get fees everywhere. That would bring in $1.25 million. If 50,000 were coming and you tagged on $50, that'd bring in $2.5 million. I'm not understanding why we're not using our alumni better. They come, they take over the campus, have a great time, which is a lovely thing, but what has the campus gotten out of it financially? So I want to throw all those things out to Dr. Lyons, and I'll wait when you come back to hear some of what you had to say. And this is a retired
I'm afraid
teacher.
to come back now. I'm afraid to come back after those questions.
I'm a retired faculty member, but I've done a lot of fundraising at predominantly white institutions. I can't figure out what's happening, why we're not. I worked for 16 years. Not once did my university ask me to make a donation.
Yeah.
Not once. I made donations, but not because they asked me to. And I'm thinking, why are they not doing that? Why not making faculty donate? Why not? I don't understand. So I look forward to hearing what you have to say when you come back. Thank you.
Sherry, if I can, Higgy, briefly say that, what you point out in terms of the preparation speaks to a deeper crisis that we have, is that social media and all the distractions of technology are really peculiar, but our young people, and I'm not saying as a blanket kind of an indictment, but particularly in communities where, and I would say in lower economic communities, in the inner cities, our young people are not motivated to learn or to read in the way that they need to be in these schools. The discipline and the schools are not giving it to them either. We got to shake it up, because our kids we used to be starving to learn, hungry to learn. But we have to, it is no way with this many educated people who've gone to school, and what has happened is we're not giving enough back. We're not going back into the schools. They're not seeing enough of us. We have the capacity, independent of what the schools do, to with almost a full brush, do more to inform our young people, to inspire them, to reach out to them. because that's critical. And the kids that are coming to college, they're going to be young people that go to great schools, high schools, come from stabilized families and middle class incomes that'll be ready. That's one thing that we just need to do more. In the same breath, they're going to be young people coming from inner cities who are brilliant and dynamic and don't have the financial resources. A lot of kids, and this is the problem I have, is that there are a lot of kids who are not financially able, who might not get the money, like the young lady from Wilberforce said, when it came to Spelman. We got to make sure that our kids who are able and who don't have the resources do have that capacity. So we got a big job fundamentally. And the last point on that is that, you love your university, you said, and so did Sherry. We talked to a lot of alumni, and Erica was talking. There are people who want to love the university, but they can't get the love back. These kids that got disenrolled and having that experience, and people come to me a lot of times, I mean, we love Howard, and with all of its faults, it's like one of the greatest places that I've ever experienced because of the students, the faculty, and even to this day, you have a former administrator on, it's a remarkable place with all of its faux pas. We just got to figure it out, but we can't figure it out if it's just alumni trying to figure it out and we're fighting the university, or as the students trying to figure it out and we're fighting the students are fighting the university. The university, the boards and the governance structure become critical. We don't want to be sitting here and I got to spend 5 years in a lawsuit against the university, and alumni got to raise money to fight the university. The university spending more than $1 million on legal fees to fight the alumni. This is obscenity. This is some stuff out of the dark ages. So we got to figure out all these things. But what it requires is us to be more collaborative and comprehensive, and thinking we have to have a plan. There has to be a call to action from conversations like this, where we have a plan, and it's not just an agenda-based plan, the NAACP over here, the teachers over here, or Urban League over here, or the Baptists over here, or the Deltas over here, and the AKAs over here. These problems really involve our future, our children's future. And so we're fragmented, and we're not really doing what we need to do collaboratively. And I'm not talking about from a celebratory point of view, where people come in and sit at a table on a seminar and talk for 30 minutes about something and figure out they're going to solve a much more structured and deeper problem. But I'm talking about where you spend hours and days, that pain report that I talked about, the lasting value and impact and promise of an HBCU is an example, even though it is in part one organization, but we have the resources. We just have to have the commitment and the vision and the fortitude to stop doing what we keep doing, which is spinning wheels and not making progress and spending. And we say we're going to have 2.8 trillion. Can you imagine a Black community spending $2.8 trillion? And we got to have our hands out to ask how we're going to educate ourselves. That's oxymoronic. Or we got to have our hands out to ask how we're going to take care of our communities. So there's this whole new direction we have to go. It's government and private sector, and we develop independent institutions, and we don't have to recreate them. All we had to do is look at what we did in the 20th century, starting from the 1900s, whether it's Du Bois, or whether it's Garvey, whether it's Tuskegee, Fannie Lou Hamer, it's all there. The Nation of Islam, Dr. King, it's all there. We had to take time and not just want to emulate the dominant culture, not just assimilate in their value system. Our value system should be self-determinative. And we have, these people don't ever want to consider themselves have nothing to do with Africa. This is the most ridiculous thing I ever heard of in the entire world, that we disconnect ourselves from our African identity and from the potential relationships. Sure, Africa is struggling to some, but let me tell you something, until we really connect with our African identity and history and the sense of possibility and try to get past the nonsense that, that's imposed through all this that we hear. We have to define what that means. Not somebody third party. We have to define what that means. They're young Africans, and I've been there. They're struggling and get into these machines, these computers they want to learn. They're in these medical schools in Congo and places where it's battered. And I mean, it's tattered curtains and all, but people want to learn. And now the future generation of Africans with technology, and you have to pay attention to what artificial intelligence means in the African space and what it will mean in terms of exponential growth. And all the countries in the world are going to the continent because that's what all the minerals are. And so, and the governments are shifting. People are thinking those older guys in Africa are going to be gone in 20 years. And there's a lot of problems. We know that. But there's new thinking. It's critical thinking. They're wise. They're sending their kids to the best schools in the world. And these kids are coming back, and they're young leaders in the commercial private sectors. These people are us. We are them. And when we understand that, you have these conversations, it's innovative, it reflects our greatest possibilities.
You're muted.
My God, I'm sorry, guys. Yeah, I was saying that. Thank you for telling me that. For I think when we have those conversations and we all come to the table, we have to accept that all voices have a place at the table. We talk a lot about the elite ism of the HBCUs, but I have this thing called the Ungawas and the Shishi Fufus, and we're all at the we all have a place at the universities, all of our schools. And we have to all be respected as having a voice and having added value to the school in some kind of way and making room for everybody. And that's not easier said than done, but everybody has to be respected. And I do think that we shouldn't just have anybody working at our schools. People should be vetted. What is your commitment to the Black agenda, HBCUs? Just not anybody should work at our schools. And I think when we don't do that, we don't protect our legacy. And I know that's harder to do, especially now, because we have diversity and all this stuff, and you can't say who can and cannot come to your school. But I think we need to be more protective about who is at our schools, who is at our schools. Angela White, you've been waiting for a while. Angela? Angel. I'm saying your name wrong. Is Miss White, are you still here? Okay. Um, Erica, I see your hand is up, but I was trying to get to somebody who hasn't spoken yet. Does anybody else want to?
Hello, can you hear me?
Okay, go ahead, Miss White.
Yes. I just wanted to thank the speakers for today, and wanted to add a comment to some of the things that have been said, especially when it comes to the educational gap that exists prior to entering a college or university. We have so many students. I work with elementary and middle school students who know that who don't, as somebody said before, who don't understand, who don't have never had phonics in school, and understand that reading is fundamental, and that when they say no child is left behind, those students understand in the fourth and in the fifth and in sixth grade that even if I fail, I will still go to the next grade. Not having that basic information. And this is continued in many of the grades through high school for some. My question is, how many, I don't know, but how many of our HBCUs actually have pre-baccalaureate programs? Is it an affordability thing? Because I remember back in the late 80s and 90s, they seem to be everywhere. And having that opportunity for students to have that year to hone in on some of those skills, or 6 months or what have you, so that they would be on that level playing field as a freshman and matriculating forward.
I can't answer that. I'm going to guess Donald probably can't either. Um, so I guess we'll throw it off to Dr. Lyons. Do you have any take on that question? I have no
I
idea.
don't have any specific numbers, but I can tell you that every HBCU where I've worked, they give you placement tests, quote, on the front end to determine where you start. They don't call it, as many of the predominantly white institutions would actually identify that as pre-collegiate, entry level, et cetera, et cetera. But most of the schools that I've worked at have an exam process, and you are placed based on that exam.
Okay, and so after that, you're placed on that exam. So there are tools and resources for the students.
That's the challenge.
Okay,
That's the
that's what I was
challenge.
saying. It seemed like in
Yeah.
the past that it was covered. I don't know if it's a financial
Yeah.
issue or administrative issue,
Yeah.
but it seemed like in the past that that gap was filled a lot better than it is now.
But think about the question, Angel, again, and the way that we think. The question that you pose is that our kids are not ready for college. That's the premise, right? The next
Yes.
thing you said is how many of those schools where these kids are applying are doing college prep programs? Maybe we need to do the damn college program preparation programs. Maybe we need to have institutions that, do this. I'm looking right now, along with some folk here in DC, at doing a supplemental Saturday program for 4, 5, 6, 7 year olds. I can't wait for somebody else to do what we need to do.
Oh, no, absolutely.
And so this is the problem, and I'm not criticizing it. I'm saying that
No.
we need to rethink how we think about our young people and what they're getting. And
Yes.
the young people also need to be motivated. I've had two 16-year-olds stay with me here this summer, and one college student at my house during the summer as guests, and they've done things. And they said, I got a chance to listen and think to them. I mean, it's surprising to me. And I'm talking about smart kids,
Yeah.
who are not exposed and not educated enough. So we need our own programs. And a lot of times, one of the problems is a generational problem. We're looking at them from the lens of our own experiences and not building the bridges to have this communication with them, to share knowledge with them. I've been running a law school prep program for 47 years. And in this program, before students go to law school, we have a 7-week program. We didn't wait for somebody to do the program. It's a 7-week program, and the teachers are all lawyers and judges who give their time before our kids. And our kids have gone from the Howards to the Harvards to the Yales to the Stanfords to Florida A&M and the like. But we decided we want to make sure that they were ready. We have too many educated Black people in the United States who can do more than wait for somebody to do it for us, so that our kids can go to the best schools and to be competitive in those schools. And a lot of kids have these, very competitive high school education, but the vast number of our students are not really prepared. And these are the lessons you learned when you were in college, Higgy learned when they were in college. Some basic things, that we could be doing if we had a national summer academy for kids going to college, where we took the time ourselves to give. They could be in the 10th grade. It could be a 10th, 11th, 12th grade program.
Right.
I'm too old to be thinking about these things, but there's some young people out there and some people out there that can figure it out.
No, exactly. No, I totally agree. At Xavier University in Louisiana, we had programs teaching third graders algebra, fourth graders chemistry. it was in a way that they could use it once they got to their higher grade, once they got to their next grade, say in high school or middle school or what have you. But I just remember there being a lot more of those programs at HBCUs, and available to students. And so having, whether it's outside of the university setting or not, I'm a firm believer in that as well, Dr. Temple.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I'm not disparaging it. I just think that, and I say with some degree of heightened urgency, is that the writing is on the wall. The shifts in American society are going to be very dramatic. And I don't know that we really read the writing for what it is and know that we too have to transform many aspects of our existence, our time, our knowledge, and our resources and our experiences. And the other thing too, and this is to you, Dr. Lyons, thank you for being here. And the institutional memory needs to be harnessed. Because the civil rights baby boomers are, they leave a lot of memory, a lot of knowledge and experience that is not being codified and institutionalized enough in a good way. It's not necessarily going to be the answer, but if future generations don't connect to that memory, the problem is that the lessons of history will be repeated. And we don't have that kind of time and luxury. Technology and accelerated thinking and artificial intelligence are not our friend in terms of the timelines. So these are urgent considerations that we need to prioritize. We think it's no other way to say it other than that. It's an urgency of now. And so there needs to be a call to action. All these brilliant people, all these people out there with these tremendous resources, knowledges, and experiences. Some people it's not being tapped. We're not talking to younger, not talking to the middle-aged people. The middle-aged people are not talking to the older people. And we need to rethink what's going on and figure out how we can maximize our resources and our leverage.
There's definitely a generational gap, and I'm just going to throw this out there. We're not going to talk about it, but the whole thing with the bonnets and the pajama thing at Tuskegee, that's a generational divide there. I think young people are like, what difference does it make?
Do you think it's generational?
There's stuff on this respectability.
I don't know that it's generational, because I think that there are two sides to that coin. But I mean, I teach, and in my classes, I want certain standards and certain discipline. And I think that when people expect that, so it cuts both ways. I mean, Elijah Muhammad was in prison. And it was when he was in prison with people that did anything they wanted to do. When he got out, he said, listen, we got to have discipline. We have to have structure. And so I think that needs to be debated, but I don't think that it's an absolute. I think there are both sides to the debate. And it goes back to the same point that I was making in terms of governance, is having these dialogues and these debates. And maybe that might be the solution, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It's something that needs to be thought out and debated more before we're conclusive about it.
Yeah. I was just throwing it out there. I think, like I said, we got to allow for all voices at all tables. And that goes for you.
You were just trying to stir the pot. That's what you were doing.
No.
That's you. Hey, listen.
Well, no, because it's out there. It's out there. And it's like, I can't, there's a part of me that says, are we really having this discussion? But for young people, they're like, yeah. The young people are like, yeah, we're really having this discussion. To them, it's important.
It seems so minor, but I think Donald kept saying there's a bigger piece of this thing, and that's just a little slice, because what I would get as a university president is, Dr. Lyons, do your students know that they're not going to be able to come into my place of employment with house shoes on? I'd have people, black, white, you name it, asking me, do you all know that? Because we actually had a couple of people come in for an interview with their house shoes on. So, I mean, that's what I'd get after my, quote, career fair day. I literally have executives, superintendents, etc., many of whom were black, asking me now, are you all serious? Do you know how many students I had come in with, I mean, with house shoes on? So the debate sounds kind of, hey, don't we have more things to do? Don't we have more things to talk about? But it's just a piece. If there's some generational issues, are you all preparing people for the future? There's so much stuff in that little discussion about the bonnets and the sagging pants and the house shoes.
Higgy, I was at FAMU when my daughter went to visit, and I looked, it was a Friday, and those kids were dressed to the nines. They were trained to
Yeah.
dress and present a certain way. And so there's flip sides in terms of policies and practices. But fundamentally, I think that Black students should always think about being at our best, period. Period. Okay. And get caught up in things. I see a lot out here. I have kids work for me now. I have these discussions with them. High school students are oblivious to many things. We have to train them, but we should be at our best, and we're wounded, we're hurting. Our history is tormented, and so we're compensating for that. But notwithstanding that, I was reading the journals of Howard University in 1924 and 25, and all I could do was smile. 50 years out of enslavement, and these people they wanted the knowledge, they were writing, they were masterful. And so we need to be aspiring to higher levels all the time.
We need to be our own benchmark. We are our benchmark, not other people.
But some of those issues are mosquitoes on an elephant's ass. Okay,
Yes.
we're fighting for our lives, and we're over here dealing with things that will not make a difference in terms of the outcome.
Yeah.
And that's my thing. I said, are we really having this discussion, at any time, but especially right now? But we are at 6:12, folks. We're getting late. Donald, I want you to please, I put in your link for lithology, but I know that you also, no, people really ask me about, I'm telling you, I sent out your program, so people are listening. But also, Donald, I know you've been doing the Instagram video. So if you have any of your links or anything that you want to share for us to be able to get in touch with you, please drop it.
I'm going back. Thank you for lithology. So, I mean, it's funny to me because as much as I do and try to do, sometimes I can be on the street and people don't talk to me about the law. They talk to me about the radio show, which is a jazz show that comes on Wednesdays. And I appreciate it because I think that music is medicine for the heart and the soul. And in our community, music has been a constant thread and backdrop for our struggle. It's always the music, and some music, I mean, the fact that people bring music together in jazz and song and orchestration is phenomenal. It's a phenomenal gift that God has given us to really manage just total emotional dynamics. So thank you, Higgy. But Wednesday nights, 8 o'clock, WPFW. We'll be back on not this week, but next week. And it's just a music that we play for the heart and soul. So thank you.
Donald pulls songs. I'm like, wow. First of all, I think Smokey Robinson is his dad, and he just isn't telling us because he's he plays Smokey stuff. I'm like, I never heard of that. But yeah, he's a connoisseur of music, and I don't even know how he finds the time to put together these very thoughtful programs. So if you haven't listened, I do encourage that you do. I'll get from him I'll get from Donald the links for the other things that he's doing so that we can share them with you. I will send out a copy of the video for this program for all of you when I download it. I don't do anything fancy. I just put it on YouTube, and I'll ask that you please join the channel while you're there. If you're new here, we meet here every Sunday at 4 p.m. and I will put you on the email list. Honestly, if you don't want to be on the email list, I am not offended. Just say, girl, take me off your list.
You know,
um,
folks should follow the lawsuit as well, the alumni
oh,
lawsuit.
yes. And
Uh,
Dean King put a good thing in there. Dean King, did you want to make a pitch for, and Erica, I see your hand is still up. Go ahead, Donald, with you. And Dean
just
King, I'm going to bring you.
that date for the next hearing, which is in the DC Superior Court,
Yes.
is August 28th, but we're expecting a ruling which could go anyway. That will be very significant for alumni at all HBCUs, and not only HBCUs, at all universities. I mean, this is a struggle that is precedent setting in some respects, but it's a 5-year battle, and it's been very, very interesting. And I think the papers and the writings would be very interesting to boards, to university presidents, and to other alumni.
Dean King, I wanted to bring you on screen to um, Dean King. Are you there? I'm sorry, Damani. I can't help it, y'all, but he was Dean King, and I go back and forth between what I call him. But anyway, Damani is one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, as is Erica. I don't know. Willie, I think, is a plaintiff as well. But anyway, Damani, you
I'm
had put in the
I'm I'm technically not a plaintiff because when the lawsuit was filed, I was still a student because this was 5 years ago. So
okay.
because of fear of like retaliation from the university, I was not listed as a plaintiff.
So, Damani, you had dropped in the chat that if people are inspired by the work that Donald is doing, that we do need financial assistance. So, did you want to elaborate on that and refer people back to the chats where you had made that?
Yes, please scroll up in the chat for that information. What the main point I want to make is that Donald Temple is one hell of a lawyer. Uh, Watching him where I have taken upon myself to read every line of his filings, and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't profess any, special expertise. But I'm telling you, when you read it, and then if you listen to the oral arguments in court, in the federal court, Donald just ran circles around the Board of Trustees attorney, who quite frankly was pitiful. There's an old saying, if you have the law, argue the law. If you have the facts, argue the facts. If you have neither, pound the table. And he forced her to pound the table because he had the law and the facts and brought it. And the lawsuit itself, I'd like to put it in the context that it's just one HBCU. It's just one particular issue, but it's a critical issue of shared governance, proper governance, and really democracy. So I posted in the chat a link to an essay that I wrote pointing out that part of what the HU board did is actually voter suppression. They disenfranchised 115,000 students, alumni, and faculty with no notice, no consultation, and in violation of their bylaws. That cannot be allowed to stand. And so we really would encourage, as much as it hurt us to take our university to court, we really would encourage everybody to support the lawsuit in whatever way you can. Thank you.
For sure. And I have to say, I was in court. Pat Johnson is on the call too. We were there in court. When was that when we were physically in court, Donald? What month was it? It was September of last year or the year before? I can't even remember.
I don't remember.
But Donald was very impressive. And you almost felt sorry for the, actually, I did, but you almost felt sorry for the counsel on the other side. But, considering.
I think that I don't want to say it, put her down. She just did the best that she could do. I don't want to say she was so pitiful, Dean, but I mean, thank God we won, but I don't want to put those guys down. They're doing their job, and that,
you're a
So he's
professional.
being great. He's being gracious as he has
Yeah,
to be.
you're in the profession. I understand that, but I don't have to be that way.
Me
And
either.
I'm certain that she did do the best that she could, but she had neither the law nor the facts. So
Right. And again, it goes back to why are we spending this kind of money? Ridiculous money
I
when we
know.
could just like sit down at a table and come up to
Work
some
it out.
workable.
Work it out.
So that would make much more sense, particularly when we're losing $64 million in
Thank
federal
you.
funding. And how many millions are we spending on this nonsense? How many kids could we put through school?
I know.
And it's not just Howard that at the end of the year we have these kids doing these GoFundMe drives. All of the schools are doing it. So we have a problem. We have a problem with affordability and access. Roger, I think, is on here. Roger's a plaintiff, and Willie is a plaintiff. Who else is on here that's a plaintiff, Donald?
I don't know. Roger,
Oh, you know that.
Roger's not a plaintiff though.
Oh, he's not. He's just very active. Hey, Roger. Willie is a plaintiff, though, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I saw Willie on here. Is Thena a plaintiff? I saw her on here too earlier.
Hello, Roger here. No, not a plaintiff, but I'm certainly supportive, as Donald and the plaintiffs well known. And a great discussion. I've listened. I haven't spoken, but or been on camera, but I've been
Yeah,
listening, and I don't want to blow DT's head up too
Please,
much. He knows I'm that guy who keeps him in check. But you were good, my brother. You were good. I give you your props. That opening remarks, and particularly love the way you talked about what the alumni, the faculty, and the students bring to their presence on the board. The perspectives, as you say, that you don't get when everybody is from the financial sector or an entrepreneur or someone of wealth and esteem. And you acknowledge that those folks, have a place on the board as well. The board needs to be diverse in that way. But absent the voices of alumni, students, and faculty, that's, in my opinion, where you get some of the crises that the university has faced, including the Blackburn takeover situation, where the students' voices weren't on the board. The alumni had been removed from the board as well as the faculty. And up until today, when we're dealing with issues related to tuition costs and unenrollment issues, having those diverse voices, I think, bring a perspective that hopefully could prevent some of the crises that we've seen, at Howard and other HBCUs recently. So, well done, all, and great job, Higgy. I think this is the second or third of these discussions I've been on over the last year or so, and great group of folks you bring together. Thank you again.
Thanks, Raj.
Thank you.
Higgy,
I
Higgy,
have to, yes.
this is,
Hi, Willie.
hello, everyone. I just want to piggyback on what has been said. As a plaintiff, we are so honored and blessed to have as our legal counsel Donald Temple, and he has done a marvelous job. He continues to do a marvelous job, and we encourage everybody to please support the lawsuit and support us in our endeavors. And Higgy, this has been an excellent program, and thank you all for sharing this with us and sharing your ideas. And I hope that you will once again support us. And thank you to Donald for all you do.
Higgy, thank you, all you. But it's really not about me. Honestly, I mean, I love the university. I love my alumni, and I love even more the students. But it's really about the principle, and I want to go back to values. It's really important. If we did not litigate this issue, it might never happen again that we have elected alumni on the board. What the alumni fought for in 1924 and 25 and 26 would be for naught. What the students fought for in 1968 and what they received in 1970 would be for naught. And the alumni that have been involved in supporting the litigation range over the last 50 years the plaintiffs, you saw the administrator, you heard a student, the young, the old. It's a beautiful thing, and it's a beautiful struggle. And so I appreciate the privilege, honestly, of being able to try to, with for this particular point in history and time, to try to do the right thing, and we pray to God that on the 28th of August, or whenever the court makes its decision, that we prevail on the alumni's motion for summary judgment. And so we're being very aggressive, and we hope we come on the right side. We hope that in the end, that the best interest of the university, consistent with its mission, is effectuated and served.
Absolutely. I have to ask, Donald, Lamar Wilson, are you still with us? Do you know him, Donald? Lamar? He's been very
I'm
active.
getting under mute. I just got out of mute. Thank you.
Oh,
I'm driving, so I just had my wife put in my question into the chat. Basically, I'm looking at resources. Since we're dealing with technology, in order to really take advantage of what we have, is to really get more involved. And I was thinking, I said, okay, why don't you think about having the HBC schools come together as a consortium to put together a series of data centers?
I got it.
We have the education and the background and the support, and we also probably also have the access to financing for that type of, for data centers. And that was basically the question. It's more of getting more resources.
consortium idea. Has that been tried before, Donald? Do you know?
I don't know that, I tell you what I was thinking of is that 1974, as a Howard student, I remember we used to have these National Black Political Conventions. So we sent I was part of a busload the university sent to Little Rock, Arkansas. But the idea that he's speaking about, it seems to me that was a National Black Political Convention. It seems to me that we urgently need something of that's not about fanfare, but that's well thought out, and it could be finite in the sense that it would be limited to HBCUs, but we overall need to come back to the table again about our agenda, our future. We're all over the place at a time, where we have battles in Georgia and North Carolina and Tennessee and Mississippi and DC, and we need to be thinking more deeply about what's going on and what it means across generations, with the most probing, curious, thoughtful, solution-driven thinking that we can muster. So Lamar, I appreciate it.
All right, we're going to wrap it up. But Eric,
Not a problem. Thank you.
No, thank you, Lamar. I didn't recognize your name, so I was glad to see a new face and a new name. So thank you. I want to call out Erica. Are you still with us? I know she had a burning question, and I always call out Mike Smith. Erica, are you still with us? Did we lose her? We might have lost her. Okay, which is fine because we're getting late into the evening and she's on her way to the beach. Mike, are you with us? Do you have anything you want to share with us before we go? Mike Smith?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. And thank you, Donald. That was well done. Piggy, thank you for this platform. It's much needed. Every week there are a bunch of ladies on, but I learned something too. So thank you and continue the good work.
All righty. Okay, so we've definitely gone long today, but it was well worth it. And a lot of you hung in here. Thank you all for hanging out with us. Before I let Donald go, does anybody have a burning comment or question before we sign off? Let us say that's a no. Donald, any parting words before we sign off?
No, thank you.
Donald?
No, thank you.
Oh, okay.
I've
Okay, I was
said
like, all right.
probably much too much.
Okay, yeah, we've had a great conversation here. I'm just going to thank everybody for coming. Thank you, Donald, for giving your time and your wisdom. I do encourage that you all come back in a couple of weeks when we have Dr. Lyons, and I'm going to try and get another administrator or two, just so, like I said, we can get that side of the conversation and continue this talk because it's important. Somebody put in the chats that we have a lot of ideas that came out of this, and let's try and put them together. And I will try and do that and send it out so that we can start working together. Certainly, we can start doing Saturday programs, and we keep talking about that. And there's just no reason that we haven't done it. And what's entailed in that, we can support that on our own. We don't need permission from anybody. But as Claudette reminded me, what did you say, Claudette? The children. Some village, I think, in Africa, they don't say how are you, they say how are the children, and the children, these kids at these universities are our children. So we gotta get that together. So for those of you who are here regularly, I don't know who's left, but if you can unmute and we can give Donald some love, thank him for coming to us today. I'm gonna take him and I off of Spotlight. If you all can unmute and just say thank you to Donald, I'd appreciate it.
Here. Thank you, Donald. Great work, man.
Thank you.
Good brother.
Thank you, Donald.
Thank you, guys.
Well done. Most appreciative.
And thank you, Helen, too.
Thank you all. Thank you for hanging out with us all this time, because when Black women gather,
Amazing
things happen.
amazing things happen. And thank you all for another amazing Sunday. And I look forward to seeing you next week. And we're going to sign off at this point.
Thank you, Miss Higgy.
All right. You all have a good evening.